2024 marks the 50th anniversary of Dungeons & Dragons. 50 years ago this year, men in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin sat down and modified a wargaming role-playing game in such a way to have more individual-style characters go through adventures while their armies are on downtime. Since its humble beginnings, Dungeons & Dragons has grown to be a cultural tour de force several times, and then faded into obscurity. This has left us with 5 editions, numerous video games, and countless books, not to mention all the comic books. The influence and style of gameplay back in the 70s is certainly a bit different from what we experience in modern-day gamings, but are there any old-school rules that we can bring back to make 5th edition and D&D 1, or whatever they're calling it, more fun? One of the first ways we can use old techniques is by bringing back round-to-round initiative rolling. This makes combat fast and furious. You never know exactly what's going to happen. In modern 5th edition, each player rolls a d20, adds initiative bonus, and wherever they fall in the order, that's where they are for the entirety of combat. Original D&D was not like that. You had a d6, one player rolled for their side, the DM rolled for the monster side, and it changed every single round. You never knew if you were going to go first or the monsters were going to go first. In this way, we can add it to modern versions. Now, it would be hard to use a D6 with 5th edition, so it's best to stick with a D20, but you can have them roll every round. This works especially well if you have tournament-style combat where it's one-on-one, or something where you want the results to be a bit more unpredictable. If players don't know that they are always first or second in the combat order, it makes planning a lot more difficult, a lot more challenging. Also, in the realm of combat, is declaring your actions before the turn begins. Back in the old day, people would declare their actions before they knew what order in the turn, before they even rolled. You can still use this today. For example, if you have a monster with a very high intelligence score, one way to role play that this monster is so intelligent is that it knows what the players are going to do before they do it. Have the players declare their actions at the top of the round, and then the monster can make its reactions to the player's actions known. Based on what the player is going to do, it can change its action. This is one way to really make that intelligence bonus work for them. In addition, if the players have some spell or potion that increases their intelligence to an absurdly high amount, you may want to consider giving them the advantage. You can easily whisper or text or write a note to the player with a high intelligence, announcing to them what you plan on doing with the monsters in that round, and give them the opportunity to change their actions based on what the monsters will do. Another way to really shake things up is by using one-to-one calendar time. This was a way of using a calendaring system that meant if it took your party 2 weeks to travel to whatever destination they're going to, they essentially did nothing else for those 2 weeks. There was nothing for you to do to roleplay until it got there. So, for example, if the party sets out on June 1 and it takes 2 weeks, they can't play those characters anymore until June 14. This allows you to allow players to have secondary characters in the same world that are playing perhaps a slightly different quest. This works great when you have a group of players who love to roll up new characters left and right, and they want to experiment and try different classes, different races, etc., etc. A very large component of older versions of Dungeons & Dragons involved resource management. You had to know how many rations you had to make sure you had enough torches, enough oil, all the supplies your character would need. In D&D 5th edition, people make it rain all the time with the gold. Players really don't have all that much to buy that they need. Do you really need to buy rations when somebody has Goodberry? One of the things you could do is change the resting cycle. In many older versions, a long rest was at least 1 week of rest, and a short rest was a good night's sleep. Usually in 5th edition, A long rest is 8 hours sleep, and a short rest is 1. But if we change this to the older system, players really have to conserve their spells and their uses of abilities. It also really changes the dynamic where a class type such as monk or warlock suddenly becomes more valuable when those short rests bring back those abilities. If you blow through all your wizard spells or all your combat dice with your fighters, well, you're going to have a rough week. I've already made a video detailing the problems with dark vision in 5th edition D&D, but one thing that we can do, bringing back from the past without changing dark vision as it is bringing back infravision. Infravision is basically predator vision. It allows monsters or characters to see the body heat of anyone in the room, not just invisible light. This is great when you have a place that has magical darkness or otherwise obscures vision in such a way that dark vision isn't practically applicable. By using infravision instead of plain sight or even tremor sight for monsters, you make it much harder for the players to hide and have stealth checks work. Even something like Pass Without a Trace is going to be somewhat negated due to the fact that they're not tracking you by footprints that you leave behind or broken leaves. They're just able to feel or even smell how much warmer the areas that you've touched or walked by have been. Have your players employ new strategies to defeat the infravision. So, for example, there are various cold spells which players could use to mask their heat signatures. They could do the Arnold Schwarzenegger rolling around in the mud trick. Or maybe you even blind such a creature with an impromptu bonfire. A classic way for your characters to advance in old school D&D and many other TSR games, like even Gamma World, is by giving them experience not just for killing monsters or in lieu of killing monsters. Give them experience based on loot. Now, this makes sense in a lot of ways. If your party slays a few goblins, most of what you're going to get is a few coppers and some pocket lint. But if you defeat a dragon, you'll have a hoard of gold. This type of advancement system is best when you have a group that goes more on random adventures or wants to play Tomb Raider instead of a carefully structured storyline. It also allows DMs to make up for any potential treasure deficits if you're using random tables for your treasures by giving quest rewards. The quest rewards would also count towards your XP. You could have somebody so happy with the group's success that they give the group a bonus of gold. This is great for 5th edition because, as I mentioned before, once fighters get full plate, there's really not a whole lot for the group to spend on. Okay, there might be some ships, but how many warships do people need? This way, the gold keeps being useful by allowing you to spend it in order to upgrade your character in a meaningful. And one great way to improve the realism in fights with NPCs is by having an NPC reaction table and a morale table. When players encounter some sort of NPC, monster, humanoid, creature, whatever, you can roll for it and you can see how they would react to your players. So, for example, if you have a world where dwarves and elves don't get along and your party has an elf and you run into a dwarf in a mine, they would get a lesser reaction, which means that NPC dwarf that they meet is more likely to fight and is less likely to cooperate with whatever your party's goals are. It can also work in reverse. You may be able to gain animal companions just by meeting them in the wild. A chance encounter with a bear or a tiger doesn't necessarily mean combat. It might just want to avoid the large party. A morale table informs the fight itself. Let's say your party meets up with a group of thugs in a city. If your party gets to kill one of them, you can make a roll to see how that group of thugs' morale is. You might have some that just leave. You might have some that it makes more serious so that they fight to the death. In this way, you can have a very large group of opponents suddenly whittle down to nothing, or avoid fights altogether. Not every fight has to be to draw out your party's abilities to weaken them in order to have them on an even footing with a boss character later. And this same logic applies to any hirelings your group may have. Did they pick up an extra cleric because nobody wanted to play cleric? Well, how is that cleric going to feel if players start taking big hits? Have them roll on a table as well and see if their morale is high enough to stay in the fight, or if they're going to huddle in a corner or just take off and say, screw the money. 50 years is a long time for a gaming system to be around. In this way, we have many rules, some that were official, some that were homebrew, that have been used in the system in these 50 years. There's no reason we can't go back and find the best of the best and employ them in modern games. So if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. Let me know, have you tried any of these? Leave a comment down below. And if you're looking for a new campaign guide, check out Empire of the Undying Sun. You can check it out at empireoftheundyingsun.com. It will be released later this year. I will kickstart it around the end of September as a horror campaign just in time for spook season. If you sign up ahead of time on the mailing list, you will get a free module written by Bill Sylvie, aka the Dungeon Delver himself.